Memorial Day is not Veterans Day, and that matters. You know, every single year around Memorial Day, I see the same thing happen. People thank veterans for their service. Stores run sales, people fire up the grills, and somewhere in all of that, the real meaning of Memorial Day starts to get lost. Now, listen, I'm a veteran, and I absolutely appreciate when people support veterans. I do. But Memorial Day is not Veterans Day. Veterans Day is for all who served, people like me, people who wore the uniform, came home, built their lives, raised their families, and continue to serve their communities in different ways. Memorial Day is different. Memorial Day is for the ones who never came home. It's for the empty chairs, the folded flags, and the families who had to answer the knock at the door. Children who grew up without a parent, and the spouses who somehow kept breathing after their world stopped. That's what this day is about. And I think we owe it to them to remember that correctly. Because freedom has always had a price, and somebody had to pay it. Not metaphorically or symbolically, literally. These people were real, with real names and real families, and gave real sacrifice. And I think sometimes we become so used to our freedoms that we forget there are Americans buried beneath white headstones who never got a chance to grow old because they gave everything they had for this country. And that's what Memorial Day asks us to remember. Now, before I go a little deeper into that, I want to take a step back and just talk a little bit about how Memorial Day actually began, because I think history matters. Memorial Day originally started after the Civil War. Back then it was called Decoration Day. And honestly, the name makes sense when you understand what people were doing. Families, communities, widows, and children would go to the graves of the fallen soldiers and decorate them with flowers. That's where it all started. No sales, no vacations, and no long weekend energy. Just grief. That's the origin. People trying to honor the dead. And after the Civil War, America had a lot of dead to honor. Hundreds of thousands. The country was grieving on a massive scale. And one of the earliest large observances happened in 1868, when General Logan called for a day of remembrance for the Union soldiers who had died in the war. But over time, that observance evolved. Eventually, after World War I, Memorial Day expanded to honor all American military personnel who died in service, not just Civil War soldiers. Then in 1971, Memorial Day officially became a federal holiday, observed on the last Monday in May. But here's the thing. Even though the name changed and we've moved forward, the heart behind it has never changed. Remember the fallen. That's it. Pretty simple, but important. And I think one reason this day matters so much to us veterans is because we understand something many people, thankfully, have never had to fully understand. When you serve, you know the names, you know their stories. You know people are here one moment and gone the next. And even if you personally never lost somebody in combat, you understand the reality that somebody else did. There are Gold Star families all over this country carrying the weight most people cannot even imagine. And if you don't know what a Gold Star family is, it's a family who lost a loved one in military service. Think about that for a second. A mother who keeps her son's room the same. A husband raising children alone. And the parents who receive medals instead of future memories. And the kids who only know their parent through photographs and stories. Memorial Day belongs to them too. And really, maybe more than anyone else. And I think sometimes we unintentionally rush past that part because grief makes people uncomfortable. But remembering people matters. Saying their names matters. And telling their stories matters. Because once people stop remembering sacrifice, nations start taking freedom for granted. And freedom has never been free. I know that phrase gets said a lot, and sometimes way too casually. But if you really stop and think about it, it should hit us harder than it does. Freedom cost somebody their birthdays, anniversaries, futures. it costs parents seeing their children grow up. There are service members who left home thinking they'd be back in a few months and then never walk through the front door again. And I think that should humble us a little, not divide us, not politicize it, not turn it into arguments online, just humble us. Because whether somebody served in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, or anywhere else, these were Americans willing to put themselves in harm's way for people they would never even meet. That deserves remembrance. Now, I also want to say something important here. Memorial Day is not about glorifying war. It's not. And I think that's an important distinction to make. Honoring sacrifice does not mean celebrating loss. Veterans understand better than most people that war leaves scars. There's the physical, emotional, and quite frankly, generational scars that we will carry forward with us for a very long time. But honoring those who died means acknowledging the courage it took to stand in the gap anyway, to go anyway, to serve anyway, and to sacrifice anyway. All that matters. I think one of the best things we can do on Memorial Day is simply slow down long enough to intentionally remember. You could visit a cemetery, maybe teach your kids about the holiday and what it actually means. How about just take a moment and pause for silence? Maybe reach out to a Gold Star family you may know. What about reading stories of fallen service members from your hometown? Because remembering is an active thing. It takes intention. And if we don't intentionally teach the next generation what Memorial Day means, eventually the meaning disappears behind the barbecue smoke and the furniture sales. And that would be a tragedy all by itself. You know, as both a veteran and somebody who works with families and kids, I think a lot about my legacy and what is it I'm going to pass down and what are we doing with our legacy. And Memorial Day is one of those legacies. It's not just a military legacy. It's an American legacy. The understanding that freedom carries responsibility. The understanding that sacrifice deserves gratitude and that courage still matters. And you know, I do believe our kids understand this better than adults do. Kids understand how to remember people. They certainly understand love. And they know how to miss someone. And quite frankly, I've seen it in person. They do know how to honor heroes. That's one of the reasons I care so much about teaching children what Memorial Day actually means. Not in a scary way, but in an honest way. Because if we teach children that freedom matters, that service matters, and that sacrifice matters, then those stories continue. And they should continue. Now I want to speak directly to my military families for just a second, especially those carrying loss. We see you, we remember, and your loved one mattered, their service mattered, their sacrifice mattered, their life mattered. This country owes more to families like yours than words can ever fully express. And I know Memorial Day can be a complicated, emotional day for you. And for some veterans, it brings pride and grief, and for many of us both. Some people spend this weekend remembering friends they lost decades ago, and it still feels like yesterday. And that's another thing civilians don't always realize. Time does not erase certain memories. Sometimes it sharpens them. A laugh you remember, a voice you still hear, and not in a psychotic kind of way. Even a name you still think of every Memorial Day. That stays with us. So if you know a veteran this weekend, understand that Memorial Day may not feel celebratory. It may feel heavy, and that's okay. Because remembrance is heavy. It should be. But there's also something beautiful in remembering. Because as long as someone is remembered, part of them's still here with us. Their story echoes forward. And maybe that's part of the responsibility all of us carry now. To remember and to teach and to honor intentionally and to live gratefully. Not perfectly, because I certainly don't do that, and not performatively, just gratefully. So this Memorial Day, enjoy your family, enjoy the freedom to gather, enjoy the peace so many fought to protect. But somewhere in the middle of it all, just pause and remember why you can do these things. Remember the Americans who gave what President Lincoln once called the last full measure of devotion. And remember the families who continue to carry that sacrifice every single day. That's Memorial Day. And before I go, to every Gold Star family watching this, we remember you. And to those who never made it home, we have more love for God. I love you.